This is Declarations.
Pursuit of happiness, that's been misinterpreted about what it means. It doesn't mean merriment and having parties. It's really meant by the founding fathers to mean the pursuit of a full life, of a life that's have some meaning to it. And so everybody, I think, wants to feel that what they're doing with their life has some meaning to it, so that their children, their parents will think that actually this person did something useful.
Hi, I'm Todd Rich, co-founder of Declaration Partners and head of our real estate investing business. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Declarations, a new podcast where top investors and business leaders can share their insights and provide an independent perspective. We ask them to share their guiding principles and even make their own declarations about life, family, and business. A declaration is a statement of purpose or commitment. Many are aspirational and are meant to inspire excellence. To many of our listeners, a key objective is to master the art of investment. In my experience, it is often the story behind the numbers that explains the path to great investment performance. With this podcast, we'll delve into those stories. We'll learn about the key life events that shape the thought process of our guests. That knowledge can make us better people, better citizens, and yes, better investors. We're thrilled to welcome David Rubenstein as our first guest on Declarations. David is the co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, a committed philanthropist, a compelling interviewer, and the author of 4, soon-to-be 5 books. David is also the anchor investor of Declaration Partners. This is a relationship of which I am especially proud. David is known for his commitment to patriotic philanthropy and the preservation of important historic documents. David's purchased multiple copies of the Declaration of Independence, which he has placed on public display around the country. We named our firm Declaration Partners as an homage to that foundational document. The name roots all of our decisions in the ethical clarity and aspirational nature of the Declaration of Independence. Without further ado, my interview with David Rubenstein.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you very much for giving me the time to talk about these subjects today.
Well, thanks for joining us. So as we mentioned, this is the inaugural episode of the Declarations podcast, which we named along with our firm after the Declaration of Independence. You have acquired multiple copies of the Declaration. Why is that document so important? Why is it so revered and so enduring?
Well, the question you ask is one I've thought a lot about, and let me try to give as simple an answer as I can. The document is important because it's effectively the birth certificate of the United States. By drafting the Declaration and making it public, the original signers were saying that we were going to break away from England. And ultimately, the war was successful. And ultimately, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris, in effect, ended the relationship between the United States and England. And so this is the document that explained to people why we wanted to be separate. So for that reason, like anybody's birth certificate, it's probably important. Second is the question of why preserve it. We know what's in the text of the Declaration of Independence. Everyone can find it on their computer or can find it in any book that they care to look at relating to the history of the United States. But why preserve the actual copies that were available from 1776 forward? The answer, in my view, is that when you preserve history, you give people a chance to learn much more about it than you otherwise would get if you're just looking at it on a computer slide. For specifically, if you are going to look at an original copy of the Declaration of Independence, you go to the Smithsonian, you go to the National Archives, you go to the Library of Congress, you're likely to read more about it as you anticipate going there to see an original. When you see the original, you're likely to get a curator telling you about it and educating you about it more than you would otherwise do just by looking at the text on a computer slide. And third, when you actually go home, you're probably going to read more about it. So why is that important? Well, we don't have an informed citizenry very much anymore about our history. And as a result, we don't really know what the Declaration stands for as much as I think we should. We also don't appreciate history as much as I think we should. So I try to preserve these copies so that people will have a chance to see the original and be inspired to learn more. And I think the Declaration is important because it is the document that not only gave birth to this country, but also contains a sentence that we'll discuss later that is probably the most famous sentence in the English language. And that's really why the Declaration has remained so significant over the years.
And our team, I would say, really views it as a source of inspiration. What about the words of the Declaration make it so special? And what lessons can we then take away for our lives today?
The Declaration was drafted by Thomas Jefferson. He was part of a five-member committee of the Second Continental Congress, and he was given the assignment by John Adams, who was also on the committee, to explain to the public why it is that the United States or the colonies then thought it was important to break away. And there are three parts of the Declaration. There's the preamble. There is the part that explains all the sins of King George as the Declaration saw them, and then third, there is what we're going to do about it, which is to break away. At the time of the Second Continental Congress, the debate over this the text that was drafted by Thomas Jefferson basically just discussed what were the sins of King George. There were many edits, probably about 29 or 30 edits to what Thomas Jefferson actually drafted. Most of those edits, if not almost all of them, dealt with the sins of King George or the offenses of King George. Very little attention was paid to the preamble, but the preamble is the part that now people remember. We don't care so much today what King George did, but we care about the preamble because it contains this famous sentence. It says, "We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So, the two parts of that people remember, one is, of course, that all men are created equal. Now, at the time, of course, the founding fathers were many of them were slave owners, and ultimately the Constitution embodied permission for us to continue having slavery. So, how can anybody say that all men are created equal? Well, that's a more complicated subject. But the point is that we've tried over the years, as we abolished slavery and as we gave women the right to vote, and as we've done other things in the 20th and 21st centuries to give people more sense that they are equal or have an equal opportunity in this country. We've tried to live up to that concept that all people are created equal. So that's the important part of it. And it's inspired people around the world kind of live up to the same principle that everybody is equal. No matter who you are, where you're born, everybody has the potential to equal opportunity, equal treatment under the law. The second part is that's very well known is the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that was a brief description of why it is that people are alive. They are alive because presumably they want to have a full life, they want to have freedom, and they want to be able to pursue happiness, presumably without hurting other people. And so those concepts are really in the preamble, and they're the ones that have inspired people around the world to set up their own similar governments, and also inspired people in this country to try to live up to the principles that were articulated by the founding fathers in that document.
It's fantastic. And we sometimes joke here at Declaration that our pursuit is for life, liberty, and investment excellence. But you have spoken in the past about how it really takes happiness, the pursuit of happiness, to really grow a career and ultimately to have a life of meaning. So, can you explain a little bit about your own philosophy there, please?
Yes, on the pursuit of happiness, that's been misinterpreted about what it means. It doesn't mean merriment and having parties. It's really meant by the founding fathers to mean the pursuit of full life, of a life that's have some meaning to it. And in the case that Declaration, other things that I try to do, and presumably you try to do, everybody wants to have, as I want to have as well, a life where you feel you've accomplished something. You've done something with your time on the face of the earth that is meaningful. We all are here for a relatively short period of time in the grand scheme of things. And so everybody, I think, wants to feel that what they're doing with their life is has some meaning to it, so that their children, their parents will think that actually this person did something useful. So every parent wants to think their child is doing something useful, and every child, I think, wants to think their parent has done something useful, and every person wants to think that they've done something useful with their life. So to some extent, when you say the pursuit of happiness, you're really talking about the pursuit of a meaning in your life that is fulfilling and that makes other people think you've done something other than just worry about yourself.
It's inspiring, especially as one thinks about partnership. Maybe moving beyond just the simple phrase "pursuit of happiness." Maybe more broadly, can you explain on a personal level how the words in some of these documents have really helped to shape your own investment career and your commitment to business building?
Well, I always try to work with other people and have partners, and I've also tried to in fact, make my children feel I'm doing something useful with my life, and my parents, when they were alive, that I was doing something useful with my life. And I want my own feeling that I haven't just tried to make money with my life or just try to aggregate, sources of wealth or symbols of wealth, but I wanted to do something more significant with my life. And so I've tried by doing a variety of different things to try to do that. Perhaps the most visible is my philanthropy, a large part of which I've called patriotic philanthropy, which is, say, philanthropy designed to remind people of the history and heritage of this country, which is unfortunately something we don't have as great a knowledge of as I think we should. We don't teach civics very much in school. We don't teach American history as much as we used to. And as a result, we often have people graduating from college or graduate school who know very little about the history of this country and very little about the way the government operates.
Yeah, no, and that's obviously a problem that we can delve in a different place. But I'd like to really spend time talking about you personally, your investing career. Um, most people listening to this really know of your history. They know of your commitment to American history, that you've worked at the White House. They know that you founded Carlyle, which you then grew into one of the most successful private equity firms in the world. What was your vision? What went well? What could you have improved upon with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, I don't know that we have enough time to talk about all the things I could have done better because an enormous number of them. When I started Carlisle, I had very modest ambitions of building a 5 to 10 person little investment firm in Washington, D.C. And there wasn't something quite like that in Washington, though there were many firms like that in New York. Gradually, we expanded to be more of a leveraged buyout firm, later called private equity firm. And then our main concept that changed the face of private equity, if anything really did, was that we would have multiple funds, not just one buyout fund, but funds in many different disciplines, growth capital, real estate, and so forth. And then we would be global. We would have funds in Europe or Asia, Japan, so forth. And that's what we try to do. And that enabled us to grow, plus obviously having a reasonably good track record. I can't say that I had the vision that this would be as big as it later became. But I think if you go back and look at most people that build companies, they tend not to think at the beginning they're going to build something that's going to be a global company. If somebody at the very beginning thinks they're going to build a global company, you might be wary of them because they might have ambitions that are overly grandiose. But if you go back, and I wouldn't compare myself to them at all, but if you go back and look at some great companies started by some great people in recent decades, Bill Gates with Microsoft, or Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, or Steve Jobs with Apple, I think at the beginning they were just trying to survive, as we were at Carlisle at the beginning. And so I don't think any of them thought they would build companies with the kind of market values that they now have.
Well, I would tell you personally, as an entrepreneur and the son of an entrepreneur, that is, that rings true. Obviously, entrepreneurs all have to live that life where you struggle a little bit trying to make it work, and then usually, or I should say, sometimes, for those who are fortunate enough, you reach a tipping point. At which point you know that the company has succeeded and that you're off to the races. In your case, there must have been a tipping point at which you realized that Carlyle was no longer just a 5 or 10 person investing firm, but it must have then reached real success. What was that tipping point?
When we first started the fund, we didn't have a sufficient track record to develop a fund. We just had a small firm that we would do deals deal by deal. But gradually, after a couple of years, we did develop a track record. And I think maybe 3 or 4 years into the firm, we began raising serious funds. And then we recruited Frank Carlucci pretty much at the beginning, former Secretary of Defense. He gave us a lot of credibility. We later recruited Jim Baker, former Secretary of State. He gave us enormous amount of credibility. And then George Herbert Walker Bush became an advisor. John Major became an advisor. And so people around the world were beginning to say, who is this small firm in Washington, D.C.? Why did so many famous people agree to join it? And so that gave us, your phrasing, a tipping point. People began to take us seriously. In the end, when we started raising multi-billion-dollar funds, people took us even more seriously. But I wouldn't say that it was given at the beginning of the firm that we would ever achieve that goal or that reality. Many times at the very beginning, I thought we weren't going to survive, but we ultimately managed to do so.
Well, I'd say that's inspiring, certainly here as an entrepreneur, and wonderful to hear. Now, you then spent a long time running Carlisle as their CEO, or one of their, really a partnership model, but where you were the CEO. And after a while, you then decided to step back. You are no longer in that position day to day, And as you made that decision, that transition, you also decided to form a family office, which was meant to direct some of your personal investments. What are your goals for the family office?
Well, family offices have been around for generations, probably more so in Europe than in the United States. But now in the United States, there are a fair number of them as well. What I wanted to do is diversify. That's a very important principle of investment. So I have the bulk of my net worth was tied up in Carlyle investments and Carlyle stock. And while I have a great deal of confidence in both, I did think that some diversification would be a good thing for myself and my family. So I thought declaration could be created in a way that wouldn't conflict with Carlyle, but I would do so in a way that would invest in deals that Carlyle wasn't considering or in areas that Carlyle wasn't doing, and therefore create some diversification.
How do you think about family office investing? Are there any differences in philosophy or style or duration that would affect individual or family investors, perhaps in a different way relative to their institutional counterparts?
Well, private equity firms have a good and bad image. The good is that they're thought they'd be pretty good at getting good rates of return, and that's why people give them staggering sums of money and have for many, many decades. The bad is that many people think that private equity people care more about fees than they do the ultimate investment results. They don't worry about ESG concerns as much as maybe some investors would prefer. They tend to be more cutthroat than maybe people would prefer. They tend not to worry about how long the company is going to survive or how well it will do after they sell the company. In other words, they're trying to get their profits and go on to the next thing and don't worry about whether they've created a company or rebuilt a company that will survive. So those some of the images problems that private equity firms have, rightly or wrongly. Family offices are thought to be much friendlier to the people they're dealing with. They tend to have longer term perspectives. They obviously are not as focused on fees. And therefore, when you're talking to other investors, many of whom are family investors themselves, they feel more simpatico with a family office than they might with a private equity firm.
Yeah, no, we sometimes talk about family investing as being really periodic, high conviction investing, often in partnership. And that's something I'd like to come back to later is really how we think about partnership, how you think about partnership. But beforehand, I wanted to transition maybe to some great investment misses. Frequently, investors on podcasts often talk about their wonderful successes. You've been kind enough and humble enough to also mention some things that didn't work out. One in particular, it often comes up, and this is an investment that you made in Amazon. And from memory, you or Carlyle, I guess, owned a book distributor which sold its bibliography for an equity stake in a small entrepreneurial firm, I guess in Seattle. That company eventually went public, and you sold the shares maybe a bit too early. It feels like there's a lesson in there about being flexible to some degree when you see an opportunity, but then also patient enough to allow it to grow and compound. How would you describe that experience?
Well, expensive. Carlyle had bought a company called Baker and Taylor, the second largest book distributor in the United States. Unbeknownst to me, a young entrepreneur came and said he was going to sell books over the internet. He needed a bibliography of books available. And so our company had one of the largest bibliographies of books in print. And so he offered, I think it was 20% of the company to get the access to the bibliography because at the time he was only going to sell books. That was his idea. We said we don't make available our bibliography that way, and we didn't want stock in a startup company, which we didn't think would get very far, probably. So ultimately, our salesman who was negotiating this got an agreement, I think, for $100,000 a year for 5 years. As the company was moving forward and using our bibliography, I went out and saw Jeff Bezos and said, I think our salesman probably didn't do a great job. We probably would rather take the stock in your company than the $100,000 a year. And he said, David, that was 2 years ago. I don't need you as much, but you were helpful in the beginning. Why don't we tear up the deal? I'll give you 1% of the company. And we did. We got that, but then we didn't have enough confidence in the company when it went public. So we sold our stock as soon as we could. That was many, many billions of dollars of lost money.
Maybe there's a lesson about compounding there, but I think there's no question that despite that investment result, you've had tremendous success over your career in private investing. Hi, this is Todd Rich. Thank you for listening to the Declarations Podcast, where top investors and business leaders share their insights and provide an independent perspective. We hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Declaration Partners or listen to more episodes of the Declarations podcast, please visit our website at www.declarationpartners.com. And now back to the episode. So David, your family office has chosen to invest in several things, really here through Declaration Partners. So we invest in corporate private equity opportunities, we invest in real estate, and we've invested in some GP solutions. And maybe without getting into a defense of all of them or why you like all of them, I'll ask a selfish question because I happen to like investing in real estate. What is it about real estate investing that animates you? What are you looking to achieve with your real estate investments?
Well, real estate has been the backbone of family wealth for generations, hundreds and hundreds of years. Uh, uh, Wealthy families have ultimately made a large part of their money investing in real estate, but also holding on to real estate. And real estate has its fluctuations from time to time in values, but if you're not over levered, real estate will appreciate over a period of time. So I think for people who want a rock solid piece of their investment portfolio. Um, Real estate that's not overly levered and bought at a reasonable price in a reasonable environment is likely to appreciate in reasonable terms. Not, heroically. It's not going to double in value overnight like a tech stock might, but it's also not likely to lose, 90% of its value overnight either. So I think that real estate is an area that I personally have always been interested in. When I started Carlyle, it was one of the first things we did other than buyouts was real estate. And with Declaration, I'm very happy that we have a very large real estate and successful real estate operation because I think it's a good way to diversify one's financial holdings and also to be as reasonably assured you'll do reasonably well with the results.
David, we sometimes joke that real estate is a get rich slow, go poor quick business. And so, as long as you can avoid going poor quickly, which generally, as you noted, involves over leveraging oneself, borrowing short term debt, and God forbid, recourse debt, then you actually can position yourself to benefit from both cash flow, some depreciation if you're taxable, and then more importantly, appreciation and to really grow one's wealth over time. Is that consistent with the way you're thinking about your own real estate holdings?
Yes, I mean real estate is something that is a very important part of my own holdings, and I generally have the view that they will real estate will appreciate at a reasonable pace, probably out performing for inflation by a fair bit, but not the most heroic returns of all time. But that's okay because something that's heroic in terms of its rate of returns might go down by heroic amounts as well. And real estate, if you buy at a reasonable price, you're not over levered, you have somebody knowing what they're doing with real estate, you're probably going to do reasonably well. And I have found my real estate investments have generally done quite well for me, and I'm quite happy with them.
In addition to investing, though, where you're undoubtedly a leader, you've built a bit of a second career, maybe even a third or a fourth career as well. You've been noted as a nonprofit leader, as an interviewer, a television host, an author of several books, and now a baseball team owner. How do you find the time? And more
Well,
importantly, what motivates you to do all of this?
I guess I am still trying to prove that I'm better than my classmates probably thought in kindergarten or first grade because nobody ever thought I probably amount to that much. I was small, not very outspoken, not very talented in anything. So maybe I'm motivated by what happened in first grade or kindergarten. I don't know. I'm an only child. Only children. I do want to maybe work harder. They see a lot of that. Only children or firstborn probably tend to be more willing to try to do things and maybe they're a bit more aggressive. My, I've never been to a psychiatrist. I don't have a problem with people going to psychiatrists. I just haven't been to one, so I haven't had a psychoanalysis of what motivates me. But I'm trying at this point in my life to do things that I think are fun and that will help society in some ways or help some part of society. So I've done a lot of interviewing lately on television and other kinds of programs, and I do it as a way to educate people. I do it as a way to keep me intellectually sharp because I have to prepare for it and therefore read a lot of materials. I enjoy reading and writing. The Library of Congress is very important to me. I've chaired its support board for the last 10 years, and I've chaired the National Book Festival for the last 10 years. And I think literacy, a program for which I've started, you know, funding something at the Library of Congress that promotes the idea of literacy, is all these things are very important to me. And so I and wanted to join the world of authors myself, and have written a few books. And I have a new one coming out on the presidency that'll come out in September. I've just interviewed Joe Biden and Donald Trump to finish preparation for that book coming out in September. I did buy the Baltimore Orioles recently with some partners, and I did it in part because I felt I'd done a lot, or reasonably a lot, given my ability to do so in Washington D.C., where I've lived for most of the last 50 years. And I didn't think I'd done enough for my hometown, where I got a public school education, where I was raised, where my parents were raised. My parents were lived most of their life, and my parents are buried there. I will be buried there, my no doubt myself. And I just thought I didn't do enough for Baltimore. And so I thought when an opportunity came along to kind of re-energize the Baltimore Orioles, which very popular in Baltimore, but it had some hard times recently. I thought I would take advantage of it and with partners try to buy it and revive the team a bit and revive the spirit of Baltimore as seen through the Orioles.
Well, and ever since you bought the Orioles, David, they're really off to a great start this season. Is that because you're such a great owner?
Well, I don't think it's because of that, and I don't think it's because I'm giving hitting tips to the players or because I go into the locker rooms and tell them to win one for the Gipper. There's none of that. The team was very talented before I bought it. There's no doubt they had a good year last year after many years that weren't so good. So I think I bought it at probably the right time. I do think that our attendance is way up, and that's in helping the spirit of the team, and is obviously helping the spirit of Baltimore. So we've got a ways to go.
Got it. Maybe sticking with the Orioles and your role as owner, you made it pretty clear, even just now, that you don't intend to get terribly involved in baseball operations or in baseball decisions. You intend to leave that to the talented professional staff that you hired. And that reminds me, in some ways, of the way Warren Buffett describes his personal role at Berkshire, to allocate capital and then to allow the individual company leadership or divisional leadership to run their respective businesses with the proper incentives in place, of course. Is there a lesson here for investors more broadly?
Well, I think generally you should let professionals do what they do and not try to second guess them. And if you have people, and like we do with the Orioles, who really know baseball, this is their entire life, assessing players or picking players and drafts or things like that. I don't have that expertise, and I'm never going to get it. So I'm trying to get people that have the right expertise, or hold on to the people we already have, and then let them do what they do best. My role in the Orioles has been a bit of a cheerleader and try to promote people, promote the Orioles in the community, and maybe help with some philanthropic things in the community. So I think it's generally true that with people who do investing, who do it full time, they really know what they're doing a lot better than people who might just be calling up and saying, "I've come to some money and I'd like to do the investing myself." I think it's a fool's errand to be an expert in one area and think you can be an expert in professional investing. So that's why in professional investing, as in baseball, let the experts do what they know how to do best and try to make sure you understand what they're doing and they explain it to you, but try to let them actually do what they know how to do better than you do.
There's a real humility in that, but it makes a lot of sense. Um, you know, some billionaires, David, have a reputation, maybe unfairly, for having a big ego, wanting to control everything. You, in contrast, seem to value partnerships, really in all that you do. There were three main partners leading Carlyle. You've always been seen as collaborative in different corporate boards or philanthropic boards. Even when you bought the Orioles, as we just discussed, you actually did it with other partners, including people with strong ties to Baltimore. Actually, even when you created your own personal family office, you decided to do it in a manner that would allow you to invest alongside other groups, other families, specifically to try and create that partnership. Can you expand a little bit about your philosophy regarding partnership and teamwork? Why does that seem to be so important to you? And do you think there are benefits that accrue to other people as well?
Well, no one person can do everything extremely well. And I certainly recognize that I couldn't invest by myself and do all the work myself, or I couldn't run the Orioles all by myself. And I think you always need to have partners. And I think in my own case, I don't have that big an ego, relatively speaking. Obviously, it's a bigger ego than some people, perhaps, but I don't really feel I am so competent, so talented, so wonderful that I should do things all by myself. And you could argue that maybe that's because of insecurity. Maybe I'm insecure about how lacking in talent I really am. I got lucky in my business career and lucky in some of my philanthropic career. Now I seem to be lucky in the Orioles, but I think it's really due to good having good partners. And you shouldn't feel that having good partners means that you're not going to get the benefit of a success. You really want to share the credit. And a book I wrote about leadership, I've said that the most important leaders, the best leaders, know how to share the credit and also have some humility to them because they shouldn't brag about things and when they don't deserve the credit for those things. Let other people tell you how good you are. Don't tell people yourself how good you are. And so I admire people that kind of have that philosophy. I try to have it myself.
It's a great life philosophy. Um, I imagine that you've encountered people who have a different life philosophy, and so maybe that's a great transition to your next book, which is coming out about the U.S. presidency. Perhaps presidents have a different reputation for maybe not always listening to others or for making their own decisions. Obviously, your book is coming out at a pretty good time, given the election that's coming up in November. In fact, I think it's over 4 billion people across the world are electing new national leaders this year. So really excellent timing. What are some things that we can expect to learn from your new book?
Well, I've tried to interview many of the living presidents. I've interviewed Bill Clinton for this book, and I interviewed George W. Bush for this book. And as I mentioned earlier, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I've interviewed scholars who have studied the other presidents and try to give you an overview of what makes presidents different, what makes them tick. But the real goal of the book is to inspire people to learn more about the individuals that are running for president and to study as much as you can about those individuals and then to vote. We have less than 2/3 of the people really about voting in a presidential election. In other words, a little bit more than 1/3 of the eligible voters don't vote in a presidential election. And I think the country would be better off and maybe more cohesive if a larger number of people actually voted. So what I'm trying to do is encourage people to vote and also to learn more about the people they're voting for.
I think that's certainly laudable. Actually, the author of the Declaration of Independence would have hoped for a an educated electorate.
Well, Thomas Jefferson said that a democracy, a representative democracy, depends on an informed citizenry. Now, we don't have as informed a citizenry in many respects as I would like, or as I think would be good for the country. But hope springs eternal, and every author always thinks that their book is going to inspire people to do what they want. So I don't know that my book will inspire people to vote if they weren't otherwise inclined to. But I hope maybe some people will vote and take the election very seriously.
Some people must have asked you, "Why don't you run for president?" Have you ever considered that?
Well, as I've said to some people, I'm 74 years old and too young. I need more experience. But I think people should take advantage of the attributes they have. I don't have an outgoing enough personality, the charm, the good looks that I think somebody should have, nor a political
Please
base.
don't sell yourself short.
Well, I don't think it would work for me, but I'm happy to just educate people about the candidates and have people learn as much as they can. Just educate yourself is what I really want people to do and make a decision. I know the candidates reasonably well, and I think they all have some pluses and some minuses, but I want people to make their own decision based on their own reading of the materials that are available and make an own independent judgment. If we can get a country to do that, I think that would be a good thing to do. In many other countries, we have people voting at 80, 90% voting rates. Here we have, roughly maybe 60 to 67% roughly in presidential elections.
Well, that actually is a perfect transition, David, to some of our closing questions. And what we like to do on declarations is try and ask some of the same questions really to each of our guests. You're the first guest, and therefore this is the first time we're asking these questions. But you mentioned that every author likes to think that their book may influence people. What are some of the books, or maybe one book in particular, that most influenced your thinking or your own personal development?
Well, it's reading itself. I didn't have the money to go buy books as I was a young boy, so I got a library card when I was 6 years old, and you could borrow 12 books a week from the library in Baltimore. And I would borrow them on one day on a Saturday, and I'd read them all that day. And I had to wait a week before I could borrow another 12. But it's the idea of reading that I think is so important. Unfortunately, we have a high degree of illiteracy in this country. Roughly 14% of American adults can't read at all. And we have another problem called illiteracy, where people who can read choose not to do so. So 50% of the people who've graduated from college in this country have not read a book in the last 5 years, which is not a good thing in my view. So I can't say there's any one book, but I obviously, if you're on a deserted island and you had only one book to take with you, what book would you take? Well, the book that probably embodies the things that I think tell much about life and the history of life is the most famous book of them all, the Bible. I own a lot of rare copies of the Bible. I own the first book ever printed in the United States, which was a prayer book. But I own the first Bible printed in the United States and the first English Bible, Hebrew Bible, German Bible, and so forth. And it's an important part of my book collection because I think the Bible is a book that embodies a lot of common wisdom and a lot of history.
Fantastic. Maybe one of the things in the Bible is to talk about honoring your parents. So maybe if you could give us a little bit of insight, what is the best advice that you've received from your parents or that you give to your own kids?
Well, my parents were not college educated, and they were blue collar workers, lived paycheck to paycheck. I was their only child, and so they put a lot of their energy into me. And so my parents, I think, always tried to instill in me the confidence that I could do whatever I wanted to do, even though they probably rolled their eyes when I said I'm going to go to this college or go to this law school. I don't think they really understood what I was going to do when I started Carlyle. My mother said, "David, you don't know anything about business. You'll go bankrupt. So keep your law license in case you have something to fall back on." So I still remember the DC bar in case I need to fall back on something. So parents, as I've said, the hardest thing in life to do is to be a successful parent. Raising kids is very difficult, as we all know who are parents. And so you hope for the best for your kids, but you never know what they're going to turn out to be. And so I've tried in my own kid case, with the three children, try to inspire them to do things that maybe they didn't think they could do, but try to be a role model for them and try to help them as they build their own independent lives.
Well, I guess you've succeeded. All three of your children are in private equity.
Yes, the highest calling of mankind, as I've often said, but they've done okay, and I'm very happy and proud of them to date. But as any parent knows, every child has some challenges. Every child needs some help along the way, and so when a child goes off to college, you might think the child is launched, and therefore you can go on focus on other things. I think you worry about your children until they're about 70 years old or so. So I don't think you ever stop worrying about your children or what they're going to do or try to help them in some way. So I'm still spending a lot of time on trying to do what I can to help my children, even though they probably don't want my help so much.
I'm sure they value it. Now, as we talked about earlier, the Declaration of Independence really talks about freedom for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What do you do in the pursuit of happiness?
I own podcasts. This is my pursuit of happiness. So I love doing podcasts.
Well, thankfully, you bring happiness to many others as well doing
Uh,
this.
So to be very serious, I do love podcasts, but I everything I'm doing at this age in my life, I'm now 74. Um, I'm doing because I enjoy it. So I enjoy investing, I enjoy interviewing, I enjoy writing, I enjoy sports, I enjoy exercising. So everything I'm doing, I enjoy. I don't know what's the most enjoyable thing in my life, but right now the Orioles have been taking a lot more time than I thought they would, and because they're doing so well, people are coming up to me and congratulating me. I didn't really have that much to do with it, but I when I go to the Oriole Stadium, I at Camden Yards, I have a lot of pleasure in that, and also getting to see people who I haven't seen for a long time who live in Baltimore now come to the games and see me and get to meet with people who I bring people into the owner's box. There's 55 seats in the owner's box, and I have it filled every night with people that are season ticket holders or people from community groups or children or little leaguers who would not normally get into an owner's box. And then I take them down to the field sometimes, take them into the dugout of the clubhouse, and then people have a great time. And so when you can make other people happy, that's a good thing.
And David, I'll just confirm there is no better way to see the game. Camden Yards is a fantastic stadium, and that's wonderful that you do that. Final question. Some people define a declaration as a statement of purpose, an indication of an important mission. What are your guiding principles? What is your declaration?
Well, my declaration is really to try to do something with your time on the face of the earth that you would feel proud of, to let your parents know you did, and hopefully they'll be around to see some of it, and to help your children think that they have a father or parent who's done something that they're proud of. but then also to help other people. The greatest satisfaction in life comes when you're helping other people achieve their goals and not when you're telling other people how great you are. So the greatest satisfaction I have is when other people benefit from some of the things I've done, most significantly, let's say scholarships. I have many different scholarship programs around the United States, and they give people a chance to go to college or graduate school that might not otherwise have been able to do so. Things like that are things that I enjoy the most, and probably making my parents proud was probably something that really enjoyed, and giving back to the country. This is a country where somebody with my last name and with modest birth, in terms of wealth and so forth, might not have been able to rise up in other countries and achieve very much. But here I've been able to do it. So I really enjoy giving things back to the country, and what I've said earlier called patriotic philanthropy.
David, thank you very much. Inspiring as always. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your partnership and your time. Thank you for all that you do for us at Declaration and for those across the United States.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. You've done a great job for Declaration, and your last name embodies exactly what we want to do for the investors.
As I may have told you, that was an aspirational last name. So the apocryphal story is that when my grandfather came to Ellis Island, he came to this country with nothing, not a penny to his name, just after his bar mitzvah. So at the age of 14, um, they asked him to change his name, and he didn't want to sound like he had quite as Jewish a name, and so he picked the one English word that he knew, which was his goal in life, and he picked rich. And so we are all continuing to work to honor his legacy and to achieve greatness, not just financially, but hopefully, like you,
Well,
by giving
well,
up.
it's a good thing that he didn't know the word poor then, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Thanks you very much, Todd.
Thank you.
This podcast is provided for discussion and informational purposes only, for use by Declaration Partners LP, together with its affiliates, referred to as Declaration or We. This information discussed in this podcast may change at any time without notice, and there is no duty by Declaration to update any person to whom this information is provided. This podcast does not constitute an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to purchase any investment product or any interest in the fund or any other investment vehicles or accounts managed or advised by Declaration, a Declaration investment product, in any jurisdiction to any person. Any such offer or solicitation for interest in any Declaration investment product will only be made pursuant to such Declaration investment products' definitive offering documents, which contain a description of the material terms, including risk factors, conflicts of interest, fees and charges, and regulatory and tax considerations relating to such Declaration investment product, and which should be reviewed carefully by potential investors prior to making an investment decision. This podcast does not constitute tax or legal advice. The listener is urged to consult a professional tax and/or legal advisors regarding the possible tax, legal, economic, regulatory, or other risks and consequences associated with any investment, and must be able to bear the risks involved. This podcast may contain certain forward-looking statements, which constitute Declaration's views with respect to future events, which can be identified by the use of forward-looking terminology such as intend, seek, expect, target, project, or endeavor. These statements are made based upon such views as they exist as of the date herein. There is no assurance that these such views are correct or will prove with the passage of time to be correct. Actual events or results may differ materially from those contemplated by such forward-looking statements as a result of factors beyond Declaration's control, including, without limitation, any disruptions in global, regional, or local financial, credit, or real estate markets, acts of God, fire, hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, earthquakes, or other natural disasters, outbreaks of an infectious disease, pandemic, or any other serious public health concern, war, terrorism, labor strikes, electricity shortages, or other national or local emergencies, or any combination of the foregoing. David M. Rubenstein is an anchor investor in Declaration Partners Real Estate Fund II and is not an employee of Declaration. Neither the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission nor the Securities Regulatory Authority of any state or other jurisdiction has passed upon the accuracy or adequacy of this podcast. Consequently, from the foregoing, no reliance whatsoever should be placed on this podcast, and no decision, including any investment decision, should be made based on this podcast or on the information contained herein. Podcast prepared as of September 5th, 2024.